Hi everyone, welcome to this video. This video contains an interview that is part of episode 1 of my new podcast series called the Pete's Perspective Podcast. My name is Pieter Hogenbirk and I'm honored to be the host of this brand new show based out of Huizen in the Netherlands. But for this interview we're going international and I'll talk to John Ziegler. For more context to the interview, you can check out my podcast on, for example, Spotify or iTunes, or you can check out the links in the description of this video. In our conversation today, John will express his opinion of how the United States is dealing with the coronavirus, and we will also be talking about two subjects he knows a lot about, namely the Michael Jackson sexual abuse allegations and the Penn State scandal. And the overarching theme is media narratives. John Ziegler is a conservative journalist living in Ventura County, California. He's known as a sportscaster, a talk show host, a commentator, an author of books, and a documentary maker. And John has been a columnist for Mediaite since 2016. He has written columns for that, which were often critical of President Donald Trump. And he even hosts a podcast which is completely dedicated to covering the presidency of Trump. And that podcast is called the Individual One Podcast. He also runs another podcast called The World According to Zig. I love that one a lot. I don't know if that show has stopped or if it's on a break, but I recommend you to check that out too, especially if you enjoyed the interview that is about to come and if you want to know more about the Michael Jackson and the Penn State cases. Well, welcome to the show, John.
Thank you, Peter.
As I've just mentioned, you live in Ventura County. What is it like living there at the moment?
Well, we're in California, Southern California, just north of Los Angeles. And, as far as the virus is concerned, we've been fairly lucky so far. We've had just over 70 people die with the virus out of over 850,000 people in a 5-month span. So if you had told us that at the beginning, I think most people probably would have been doing a dance, but somehow all of our perceptions are now very off, and we've seemingly forgotten what the situation was when we started this whole thing, and now our expectations and perceptions are very different, and we don't have a normal life here. My two daughters, 8 years old and 3 years old, have not been able to have anything close to their normal summer. We've done the best that we can to try to entertain them, but it's very, very difficult. They don't get to see most of their friends. They're limited in seeing their relatives. They have two elderly grandparents that they miss seeing. They've only seen very, very sporadically. So, it's a rough deal. I personally think this is a bad situation, but one that we have handled in a way that makes it even worse than it actually is.
Yeah, because you are one of the plaintiffs of a case, the reopening of schools of California case.
Yes.
Can you tell something about that?
Yes. We are suing Governor Gavin Newsom to reopen the schools here in California, and I'm one of the original 9 plaintiffs in the case. Representing this area, Ventura County, and we believe that the governor has overstepped his authority and he is treating the children of the state unequally because there are many districts in the state that will go back to, or at least are allowed to go back to school full time and in person, but he is not allowing our county to do so because we are on the so-called watch list, which I don't even think we should be on. I strongly believe that both legally and politically, it is a wrong decision on his part, and as well as ethically. I think it's similar to most of the decisions with regard to the virus, where it's going to cause more harm than it will prevent. Even in theory. And I guess that's my general premise here is that, yes, this is a bad situation. No one is saying it's some sort of a hoax or not real or not serious. It is. But that doesn't mean you make it the worst it can possibly be. That doesn't mean you create more damage that needs to happen. And it is my view that, and schools are a good example of this, that we are creating for sure far more damage than the virus ever could do on its own, in ways that really aren't even going to prevent many deaths. That's the part that's so bizarre to me. I mean, if some of these things we were doing prevented people from getting very sick or dying, you know what? I would feel better about it. I would at least make some sense. But I'm not even convinced that that's happening. I think that one of the fundamental misconceptions that we have, and I think the evidence is now becoming overwhelming that my view on this is true, is that somehow we have control over the virus. I mean, there seems to be this perception that we can control the virus, that if we just all follow the rules as they've been given to us, that somehow no one will ever get sick of this and no one will die. Well, that's absurd. It's ridiculous. And I also think that while this virus has created a lot of damage and obviously ended a lot of lives, that it has not been anywhere near, not even close to what we were told it was going to be, and that even the damage that it has done has been greatly exaggerated because of the way the data is being perceived. I mean...
Yeah, but in what way is it perceived? In what way is it perceived wrongfully?
Well, I mean, right now we are told that we have 160,000 people who have died with or of the coronavirus. That's a horrible number, although it's nowhere near what we were told it was going to be. And it is a remarkably small percentage of our population. We have 327 million people in this country. And so if you do it by percentages, it's an incredibly minuscule percentage. And then when you factor in that the average age of death, although it's very, very difficult to discern this from the data because they won't let us know what this number is, and I think that's on purpose, that it appears as if the average age of death is at least 80. So this distinction between dying of coronavirus and dying with coronavirus is incredibly important. I mean, let me take this out of the theoretical and put it into the practical. So right now we are averaging on our 7-day average. We're now just over 1,000 deaths a day again. It had gone down to almost 500 deaths a day. Now it's just over 1,000. That's a big number, except when you consider that in this country, every single day, on a good day, 1,400 people in this country die in nursing homes every day, at least. Yeah. Sometimes it's more than that, depending on the time of year. So if you do the math, if, let's say, coronavirus has hit 30% of the population, we don't know at this point because there's so many asymptomatic cases and not everyone's getting tested. But let's say it's even in that ballpark, right? If that means that you have a baseline of 400 or 500 deaths a day, you cannot go below, because that's called nature. That's called life. I mean, if you have almost a third of the people in nursing homes who are dying, and then they get called coronavirus deaths, you can't go below that because it's never going to stop until the virus is so dissipated that it doesn't even show up in a test of anybody, which isn't going to happen for a while, even under the best case scenario. So this distinction of dying with or of, I think, is underplayed. I mean, there's a lot of, when people, have you ever noticed, I didn't really notice this until the coronavirus situation, that when you read obituaries, and now I've done this fairly religiously because now I'm looking for it, almost invariably, anyone who dies over the age of 70, certainly over the age of 75 or 80, when they die, how they died isn't even mentioned in the obituary. It's not even mentioned because it's just accepted that, guess what? That's when you die. That's called natural causes. And so it is astonishing to me that we have this illness that's that's causing people to die at the average age that is well past life expectancy. And that doesn't mean that some young people aren't dying, but some young people die of the flu every year. Some young people die of all sorts of things, and we don't shut the world down to try to prevent it, even in ways that don't make any sense. So I have been very frustrated. I'm sure that I've been greatly misperceived because now anyone who is a skeptic about the virus is automatically presumed to be a Trump supporter or a nut job or a conspiracy theorist or whatever. I mean, whatever name they're going to call you that day. And I just, it's not as if I am not empathetic or don't care or haven't read the science or haven't studied the data. I just would like an answer as to how it is that what we're doing isn't causing more harm than good. I mean, we're not talking about increase in suicides, alcoholism, depression, child abuse, domestic abuse, not to mention the economic catastrophe that's looming here. I mean, the amount of damage that we have done, I mean, my gosh, all sorts of different, I mean, our birth rate is going to go much, much lower than it currently, way lower than it currently is. Our public health, just even from a standpoint of how much weight everyone has gained during the lockdown. I mean, these are things that because it impacts everybody as opposed to a tiny percentage of the population, it's going to have a massive cumulative effect that is far greater than the damage done by the virus. I mean, the virus so far, if we accept the data, 160,000 people have died, average age of 80. So how many years of life and what quality of life has the virus actually taken away from us? It's substantial, it's real, but it is not enormous. It is not remotely unprecedented. But when you take a look at all the other aspects of life that are going to be harmed by our reaction to it, to me, it's mind-blowing. And not to mention that a lot of what we have done is contrary to the principles that the country was based upon, which is freedom, liberty, personal responsibility. All of that's just been totally thrown out the window. And now we are a socialist country that is completely wedded to the idea that government is in charge of everything. And that's very depressing and scary to me.
I understand, yeah. And why do you think this overreacting is happening?
It's a perfect storm of circumstances. I've been in many stories where I've seen a perfect storm, and this one is a perfect storm. And I don't think that you can to talk about the perfect storm without first mentioning, obviously, we are in an election year in America. And not only are we in an election year, but we have a highly, highly controversial and unpopular in many respects incumbent president, Donald Trump. And this comes about literally after he has escaped impeachment, where it's looking like he's going to be reelected. And I think, I want to be clear, I'm not a conspiracy person at all. In fact, I'm an anti-conspiracy person. I think that people took advantage of an opportunity. They didn't create the opportunity. I think they took advantage of an opportunity. They might not even realize what they're doing. Some of this might be subconscious. I mean, it's almost Pavlovian now that the liberal establishment, let's be clear, part of this perfect storm is liberals control every element that is driving the reaction to this. They control the academic community, the science community. They control the media. They control these big state, blue state governorships. They control the sports world, which I think has played a key role in this. I mean, remember back in March when all the shutdown began, a lot of this started with academic institutions and sports institutions deciding we're shutting down. That wasn't to get Donald Trump, but I think that everyone viewed this as one, and there was some logic to it. that we don't trust Trump, and he's telling us everything's going to be okay. So if he's telling us everything is going to be okay, oh my gosh, we're all going to die because we don't trust him. That was actually somewhat understandable. But I do think that there became a momentum of, yes, we're saving lives, but by the way, we're also getting rid of Trump. And I think that played a role. Now, people will counter and say, but John, what about the whole world? The whole world shut down in similar fashions. Yes and no. And I would also suggest that America plays a pretty significant role in how the rest of the world perceives things. I think it had a major impact on the rest of the world when they saw even the great United States, powerful United States, based in freedom and liberty, that's literally been our brand for well over 200 years. Even we were locking down and shutting down life. I think that had a very powerful impact on the rest of the world. I'm not saying that it dictated to the rest of the world, but again, a lot of people need to understand how interconnected the thinking is and how the dominoes work here. I'll give you a quick example. It sounds like a small deal, but back in March, I'll never forget the moment I realized, oh my gosh, this is going to be huge, was something that was a very small event. And that is that the Ivy League canceled its basketball tournament, which is not, even that big of a sporting event, although, people who attend it, look forward to it every year. But I realized that meant all of academia was going to shut down sports because they look at the Ivy League, kind of like the rest of the world might look at the United States, as they're the smart ones. They're the ones that if they're shutting down, we better shut down too, because they know something we don't. And if they're shutting down, we have no political cover if something goes wrong, because then we're going to get blamed. Well, why didn't you shut down? The smart guys at the Ivy League shut down. And so once that starts this cancellation contagion, this domino effect, there's no stopping it, because now no one has political cover. That's what everyone needs in this kind of a situation, especially when it's unprecedented. You need political cover. And that was taken away. And that doesn't happen, by one giant decision. That happens kind of like with a match in a brush fire. And then once that fire gets out of control, there's no stopping it, because no one's going to stand up against it, because there's no risk reward. No one's going to stand up against this avalanche of shutdown, because that's the easiest way you're going to get destroyed yourself if you stand up against it. Look what's happened to Sweden. Sweden had the audacity to say, well, we're going to believe in personal responsibility, and we don't believe that this is, the right way to do it is through a government lockdown. And they've gotten destroyed. And yes, they made mistakes early on, and nursing homes, they had a lot of nursing home deaths. By the way, I believe, from what I can tell, their average age of death is the highest in the world. It apparently is 86. And so, yes, they suffered a lot of deaths early, but it appears as if they're done with the virus now. They're averaging 2 deaths a day now, and almost no new cases. So it appears as if their view has been vindicated in the long run. Yes, there was a cost to that, but more importantly, what you've seen in the media coverage of Sweden is they went outside the herd, and therefore the herd must run them over. Because if they go outside the herd and they succeed, they will show that the rest of the herd was wrong. So the media is invested in destroying them, and we have seen the coverage of Sweden has been unbelievably negative, and there's been almost no coverage of the fact that, oh, by the way, the virus is gone there, which you would think would be a big story in America, because frankly, the relevance to me about Sweden is not, did they do the right thing? I think it's still open for debate, whether or not they did the right thing. I don't think we're going to know for sure for years. I'm someone who likes to get all the facts before I come to a conclusion. And while I suspect they might have done the right thing, I don't know that for sure. But here's the part that it makes Sweden really relevant. Sweden effectively, single-handedly blows apart the fundamental premise of what started this whole thing. And what started this whole thing was, if left unchecked, we're all gonna die. I mean, that was the premise. Oh my gosh, if we don't do something dramatic, we're all gonna die. Millions of people in America are gonna die. Well, Sweden single-handedly blows that apart, because here's a country of just over 10 million people that clearly had the virus in a significant way. They did no government lockdown. And while they suffered in the short run, the virus worked its way through and apparently is now been dissipated with, just over 5,000 deaths of people average age 86. Is that a great outcome? No. But is that a catastrophe that warrants a complete destruction of all life? I would say no. And so I find the Sweden situation to be very interesting on numerous fronts.
Yeah, because the problem with the lockdown is also, for how long do you want to keep the lockdown? Right?
I've always said, where's the end date? I mean, because once you have, one of the many things that has driven me bananas in this whole deal is that the burden has now totally flipped. The burden should 100% be on those who want to stop people from doing something. Okay, like for instance, here in Ventura County, we have massive beaches, plenty of room for social distancing. Yet, for a long time, our beaches were at least somewhat closed, and on the 4th of July weekend, they were totally closed. And I keep screaming, okay, what's the evidence that a beach is remotely dangerous? Can you show me even one case? Forget about a death or a hospitalization. Give me one case that was contracted on a beach. The burden should be on those who are shutting things down. Now we're in this strange situation where the burden appears to be on us for proving why we should be allowed to do things. And it's almost impossible to make that a case, especially, by the way, when the media is completely invested on the shutdown side of things. So that has been a real concern and frustration to me, is that how did we get to this place where now we have to prove why we're allowed to go back to normal? And, this flatten the curve for a few weeks to get hospitals ready turned into permanently we have the right to do whatever we think might or may not diminish new cases. What? That is the greatest bait and switch in the history of man. The greatest bait and switch in the history of man. And I am baffled as to why there has not been more backlash against this. I mean, because it is so obvious. I mean, we were told very clearly, we're just doing this for a few weeks, maybe a month, flatten the curve, get the hospitals ready. And now we've just accepted that our government officials have the right to do whatever they want if they think it might delay or diminish new cases, even without any evidence that will happen. And that's not America to me. That's not nor is it smart.
But there is backlash, right? There are protests. You're gonna speak at the protest next week?
Yeah, I'm scheduled to speak at a protest next Saturday that is in favor of the recall of our governor, Gavin Newsom. I hesitate about doing these. I've done a few of these protests previously, and unfortunately, I don't think they do that much good, except making people feel better that they're not alone in their frustration, because politically, they get seen as a pro-Trump event. And here in California, if it's pro-Trump, inherently, at most, you're only going to have 30 to 35% support in the public, and therefore, it's not really of any major threat to the Democratic governor. So, I'll go. We'll probably bring my daughters and my wife, and maybe have a good time with it. But I'm very realistic about what all that kind of thing accomplishes.
Okay, that's too bad. And what about your talks at the panel, the Ventura County panel? You spoke 2 times?
Well, yeah, I spoke to them back when they allowed the public in person. And it's not a coincidence that after I spoke to them, they stopped allowing the public to speak in person. Mm-hmm. I spoke for 2 minutes. I thought I was going to have 3 minutes. And then they cut us down to 2 minutes for some reason that I'm not understanding of. And I just went off on them. And I had no expectation that anyone was going to see this other than maybe a few people on my Twitter feed where, I would tweet out their link. These meetings are like 6, 7, 8 hours long, and then someone's going to find my 2-minute speech within this 7-hour link, and then all of a sudden people started taking the clip and sharing it on all sorts of social media platforms, and I don't know for sure how many people saw this worldwide, but it had to be at least a couple of million, based upon what I can tell. Weirdly, I got more messages from outside the United States than I did from our own Ventura County, wow. which is strange. I mean, at least I think I did. It was close. I think that was just the weird way in which the video went viral. Plus, I have a Twitter feed that, largely because of the Michael Jackson case and other cases, is rather international in scope. I mean, I don't, my followers are not focused in any one location, certainly not here in Ventura County. But that was a big surprise to me. And I think it touched a nerve because I was just so frustrated and angry and really just all let it out about what is happening. And, I think what's happened since then has vindicated my belief. I mean, part of what I was talking about was masks, and California is a perfect proof that mask mandates don't work. I mean, we've had a mask mandate in California now for almost 2 months, longer than that in Los Angeles, and the numbers have only gone up since then. So, I mean, I don't, that the correlation doesn't prove causation, but shouldn't there at least be some correlation between mask mandates and cases going down? Because there's not here in California. And I love it when I mention that. And the reaction I always get is, well, people aren't wearing masks. Are you kidding me? Los Angeles, California, one of the most liberal cities in America. I mean, you get screamed at if you don't wear a mask. There's absolutely no indication people aren't wearing masks. And yet there's also no indication that masks are helping at all. And then of course, the most hilarious part is, to me, is, so wait a minute. So mask mandates aren't working. So your solution is more mask mandates or stronger mask mandates. I mean, it's just illogical. And there's a reason why, before all this happened, the science was at best ambiguous about the value of masks combating a virus. I don't think people understand how tiny a virus is. You've probably seen on Twitter, because these pro-mask people are so arrogant. They think they're the smart ones, and then they show you this experiment done, with bacteria, with a petri dish, where one's with a mask and one's not with a mask, and the one without a mask, the bacteria is everywhere, and with the mask, it's clean. Well, first of all, that's not real world. But second of all, more importantly, bacteria is different than a virus. Bacteria is gigantic in comparison to a virus, and And so, when Dr. Fauci said in March, we don't need masks, almost mocking them, which has gone down the memory hole, and the Surgeon General said we don't need masks, and then all that flipped, and that kind of goes back to my Trump theory on this. I really, truly believe, with every fiber of my being, that if at the beginning of this pandemic, or near the beginning, Donald Trump had been the person who said, I am demanding that everyone wear a mask. I'm going to sign an executive order. It's a federal mask mandate. We're all going to wear masks. I truly believe the left would have revolted against masks in a massive way. They would have said the science doesn't justify this. This is against our freedoms and liberties. This is not what America's about. But because the mask was seen as a symbol of opposition to Trump, at least subconsciously, once it becomes politically popular, and I don't think the experts ever dreamed that masks would become this popular with the public. Even those that were in favor of masks, I think they were terrified that if I come out in favor of a mask, I'm going to look like a complete jackass because no one is going to buy this in America. And then when they saw the polls and they saw people wearing them, they're like, oh my gosh, people are really going to go for this. I better get on board because otherwise I'm not going to be on the right team and I'm going to be left in the dust. And then, Fauci and our own medical officer have claimed, no, we weren't really wrong all that time about masks. We were just lying to you because we didn't want there to be a run on masks. That's my favorite. We were just lying to you. Don't let that impact our credibility at all. And by the way, if we were lying and masks are so important, we were also putting the lives of many people at risk.
But it's for the greater good.
Right. I can't even make that work in my brain, but somehow that's people buy that. That's what's the most amazing. I based upon my Twitter feed reactions, people really buy that as a plausible, legitimate explanation. And to me, that's emblematic of how crazy we have all become in this. We've lost our minds. I mean, basic logic has just been blown apart. And it's very frustrating. I mean, I get people all the time saying, John, what happened to you? You used to be so logical and so smart, and on this, you've just completely lost your mind. And I'm like, has it ever occurred to you that maybe you guys are the ones that lost your minds in the middle of a panic? Because I feel like my feet are firmly on the ground here. And, look, I've been wrong about a lot of things. I don't think I've been wrong as many times as Fauci has been wrong on this whole deal so far. But no one has been right about everything. This is a very difficult situation. And I'm the first person in the world to admit when I'm wrong, and I'm the first person to change my mind when I get new information. But I am very convinced that we are acting in a panic. And when people act in a panic, and I've seen it before, all rationality gets lost and stupidity reigns, and we've seen that here.
Yeah, and what do you think about Trump's reactions? Because he flip-flopped sometimes. How do you think it influences his re-election chances?
Well, I think his re-election chances are almost nil at this point. I think he has a very limited chance of winning re-election. I think he needs a black swan event or an act of God type event. I mean, he's not going to. He may not get blown out. I mean, unless he just realizes he's going to lose and decides to just kind of blow up everything for his own ego. In which case, he then will get blown out. But I think if the election were today, he would lose substantially in the popular vote. He would lose significantly, probably somewhere in the John McCain, Barack Obama range in the Electoral College vote. Not a complete blowout, but certainly not that close. And on a good day, maybe he'd be closer to Mitt Romney in 2012. But I think the virus ended it for him. It ended his fundamental argument for re-election, which was, look what I've done for the economy. We don't want to go socialist. Well, The economy's been blown, and we are socialist already. So that obliterated his own argument. I mean, you can't argue against socialism when you're handing out $1,200 checks to people for no reason and paying unemployed people $600 a week more than unemployment, so they don't even have an incentive to go back to work. So that blows that apart. But I think even deeper than that, and I talked about this in the last episode of our Individual One podcast, I think that the key to Trump's appeal has always been he's the one guy with balls. He's the lone warrior, as he refers to himself. Now, I've never believed that. I thought that was fake. But now I think we've seen that he really has no balls. That he has been completely gutless in this whole thing. He's been wrong at least a couple of times in the narrative that he has chosen. He underestimated this thing dramatically at the beginning. Then I think he overestimated it. I think he bought into the whole Fauci view because I think he got scared and decided, okay, I'm a wartime president, and this is the most important thing that's ever happened. And so he was too cold, then he was too hot, and then he keeps flipping back and forth, and he can't pick a narrative. And now, because the numbers have gotten worse in the last few weeks, he can't even claim that, we've got this thing under control and things are going to get better. So I don't, and that's not going to change. I doubt it'll change that much before the election. I mean, we're pretty darn close to the election at this point. I mean, I still believe the numbers are going to improve, in a few weeks from now. But whether we'll get to the point where we're Sweden, I don't know, because we're such a large country that it's going to take so long for the whole thing to work its way through that he may not have enough time to even be able to make that argument. And the economy's not going to recover between now and November, and it might only get worse as we start to realize just how bad it really is, because we're kind of like an airplane that's lost at least one, maybe two engines, but is still flying. And people think, oh, well, we're still flying. We're okay. Well, eventually you got to land. And that landing could be very, very ugly. So I think he lost his balls, which was his great calling card to most people. And I don't think he has a narrative. And remember, in 2016, he lost the popular vote by a couple million votes. He was incredibly lucky to win in 2016. Yeah. So now we have a whole lot more data on what kind of president he would be. And there's nobody out there thinking, I think if Donald Trump gets another 4 years, he's finally going to grow into the office and he'll learn how to do this and he'll mature, and that no one's believing that. And so that was at least a possibility in 2016. That's not a possibility in 2020. I'm not particularly happy with Joe Biden. I mean, I think he's not fully with it. I don't think he'll be president for 8 years for sure. I don't even know if he'll make it for 4 years. I was hopeful that his vice presidential nominee would be good, but the report today indicates that the three people that are most favored, I think all three of them are terrible. So I won't be voting for Joe Biden, but I don't think Donald Trump, again, barring a major event, is gonna be reelected.
But do you think it's better when Joe Biden wins, or?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean,
No?
I don't know. I mean, I would have felt better if he had picked a halfway decent vice presidential nominee, but it doesn't appear as if that's going to happen.
And who would be a good nominee?
Well, I mean, to me, I would have picked Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota if I was Joe Biden. Unfortunately, the civil unrest made that impossible because she's white, so you're not allowed to pick a white person. And if he was going to go with a black female, there's a congresswoman in Florida, Val Demings, who I kind of like. She seems intelligent. She's a former police commissioner in Florida. Doesn't seem insane. I don't understand why she's not apparently going to be the pick. But I think my guess is it'll probably be Kamala Harris, and she's from here in California, and I just think that's bad news. But so I've learned a long time ago that if something makes sense, there's a very little chance it's actually going to happen. So especially in 2020.
Yeah. Well, let's change the topic. Yesterday, Leaving Neverland received a Virgin Media TV BAFTA for Best Factual Series. I don't know if you heard the news. What do you think of that?
Well, I found it hilarious that the Twitter feed for that award got the name of the movie wrong twice. They called it Finding Neverland, and then they had to delete that tweet. Then they weirdly referred to it as The Lies of Leaving Neverland, which I don't even understand. What did they think that was the name of the movie, or were they actually disparaging the movie itself by saying The Lies of Leaving Neverland? I didn't understand that at all. And then hilariously, they also referenced that Dan Reed, on accepting the award, made some sort of plea for racial inclusion, which is really bizarre. Dan Reed's a white guy. Wade Robson's a white guy. James Safechuck is a white guy. To my recollection, there's not one black person interviewed in the movie, and here they are trying to take down a black icon. And oh, by the way, one of the people they didn't interview is Brandy Jackson, the black female who dated Wade Robson, who would have provided a heck of a lot of insight into what was really going on with Wade Robson. I mean, so it's almost comical.
Yeah.
It is comical, frankly, what happened there, and the idea that this would win an award for anything, but for factual, whatever they called it, factual movie, whatever, is absurd. I mean, we're living in an upside down world. First of all, not only is the essence of the movie false. I mean, Wade Robson and James Safechuck were not sexually abused by Michael Jackson. They were not. There's no evidence they were. The evidence is overwhelming that they were not. But there are no facts in the movie. I mean, the movie is not about facts. The movie is about emotion and drone shots. That's really all it is. It's about emotion and drone shots. And so I wonder, did anyone even watch this thing? They certainly didn't do any research on it. But and the number one, big picture reason why you should know that Leaving Neverland was a disaster, a complete fraud, is in what did not happen since it came out, in the year plus since it came out. What did not happen? Not one new accuser of Michael Jackson. Not one. That is not possible. That is not possible given the entire premise of the movie. Reed has essentially said this. The entire premise of the movie is that there are all these abuse victims of Michael Jackson who are just out there, who are afraid to tell their stories and didn't have the courage to do so. But there has to be, based upon their view of Michael Jackson, the way they describe him, he had to have abused dozens and dozens of kids. Because remember, the whole MO, which, by the way, the movie itself destroys. I mean, it inherently destroys its own narrative. The whole premise is Michael Jackson liked these boys for a very short period of time, just before they hit puberty. Then they hit puberty, and he moves on to another boy. Even though the people even referenced in the movie as boys he moved on to have said they were never abused. Even though within the movie, both Robson and Safechuck, their own stories now indicate that they were abused way past puberty. In Safechuck's case, way past puberty. So that narrative is blown apart by their own movie. But if you believe the narrative about Michael Jackson, because my gosh, he's the most famous man in the world. He has access to all these kids. and inherent plausible deniability because kids want to meet him, and he's got this Neverland Ranch where he can do whatever he wants, and supposedly all the locks on the bedroom and all the bull crap narrative. If that's the case, and he's got this voracious appetite to sexually abuse children, we should be hearing from dozens and dozens of men, especially with money. Now, my gosh, this is a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit at one point. Why has no one signed on to the lawsuit? No one. Why has no one signed on to the lawsuit? Are we really to believe that it was just these two plus potentially two others previously, neither of which ever resulted in a conviction of Michael Jackson, one of which never even testified in court against Michael Jackson? So we're just to believe that it was these four, just these four, over an extended period of time, even though there's massive amounts of money that are now potentially on the table. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And I would like to believe that if you told Dan Reed, hey, look, your movie's going to come out, it's going to be on HBO, Oprah's going to do this, blessing with this post movie, interview with you and Safechuck and Robson. It's going to get a lot of publicity. You're going to win some awards, and not one new accuser is going to come forward. I would like to believe even Reed would have thought, okay, that's a little shaky. That's a little scary, if he was being honest. Yeah. Yet no one in the media will mention this or hold anyone accountable. And the film has been deconstructed by many, many people, many of them whom are way more informed than I am. And so in a rational world, this movie has been completely discredited. It's not even a documentary. But we live in a world now where narrative is everything, and and no one wants to take that on because it's too dangerous. It's too dangerous, especially once Oprah blessed it. Once Oprah blessed it, it's over. I mean, once Oprah blesses it, the only way that it can ever be completely discredited is if both Robson and Safechuck come forward and say this was a scam. Even then, my guess is that the Michael Jackson fans would get blamed for forcing them into recanting something that actually did happen, because that's the way the media works. But the reality is that the movie is a joke. The awards are a joke. But on the bright side, you know what? I think Michael Jackson has survived this. I'm hearing him on the radio more and more. I don't think he's been damaged, but his legacy, but I don't think he's been completely canceled by any stretch of imagination. And I'm hopeful that this lawsuit will not result in any sort of judgment on their side. And at that point, I think Jackson will pretty much be safe in the long run.
Okay. Well, then you changed your mind on that, because a couple of months ago you said you were afraid that on the long run his image wouldn't survive.
Well, I think we have different definitions here. I am absolutely of the belief that it has been damaged, and it will always be damaged. And because he's dead, and there's no one to run with it, that it can't ever really totally regenerate. So I guess this is somewhat of a nuanced take. I believe that there is damage, and I believe that damage is permanent. Is it completely devastating? I don't think so as of right now, especially if they never get a judgment in their favor. So he's never going to be, unfortunately, the king of pop, universally accepted and a media darling like he once was. That's never going to happen. I also don't think, though, assuming that this all goes okay with the rest of the lawsuit, that he's ever going to be completely canceled either. Because he's got too much of a fan base. I mean, the fan base is really one of the things I've learned in getting involved in these types of stories is that you need a rabid fan base and a large fan base on your side, because that's really, if this is a war, that's how you at least survive the battle. Let me give you an example. I've become very close to Matt Lauer, former NBC Today Show host, who was accused of sexual misconduct. He never raped anybody, despite the claim that he did in a book by Ronan Farrow. He made mistakes in his marriage, which he's acknowledged and paid for. But Matt Lauer was a guy who was very famous, probably not quite as famous as Michael Jackson, but at least, in America, he was close to that. I mean, he was close to that level of fame. But it was a level of fame that didn't come with it a rabid following. With most people, it's, oh, yeah, Matt Lauer, I kind of like him, or I don't really like him, or whatever. I mean, he's a good interviewer. There wasn't, because of the nature of who he was, there wasn't a rabid following. It's just he's very, very well known. Michael Jackson has a rabid following. So he has for instance, on Twitter, my gosh, to this day, hundreds, if not thousands of people in any given moment fighting for his cause and trying to find out information on why the movie is not to be believed and whatever. Matt Lauer doesn't have anything like that because he doesn't have a rabid fan base. And so that's one of the things that Michael Jackson has going for him. And that's partially why, most radio stations still play his music, because he's still very popular. And as far as, as far as sales, my understanding is that Michael Jackson's sales of his songs has gone up dramatically in the last year plus. So all that has a major impact.
Yeah, and it helps that there's a lot of documentation about what Michael did in his life. There's documentation of every day of what he was doing.
Well, yeah, that's a good point as far as discrediting the movie. I mean, about the only way you can disprove an allegation of sexual abuse is if you can prove you weren't there that day. And with Michael Jackson, we know pretty much where he was almost every day of his life. Yeah. And there are major problems in the timeline of the movie, which of course the media has largely ignored.
Yeah. Well, luckily we have Danny Wu's documentary, Square One, about that. Well, you said while introducing the movie, the premiere in Amsterdam in January, you made an introduction video in which you said, focus on the timeline. That was the most important thing for while watching the movie. Why is the timeline so important? Can you tell us something more about that?
Yeah, and thank you for picking up on that, because I'm a big believer that the timeline in almost any story is everything. Because the timeline tells you the progression of events, the dominoes as they fall, and it tells you what the mindset of the people involved was at that moment. And in abuse cases, especially child sex abuse cases, the dominoes are so critically important. There's a way, if a story is true, that it should evolve. It should evolve actually fairly rapidly. You get an abused kid who tells an adult, a parent, a teacher, counselor, whatever. They get an investigation. The authorities interview the kid, and the first thing they do is they subpoena the computer of the person accused. They find all sorts of child pornography on the computer or in the emails. They now have the person on child porn and they they make a deal. There's a plea bargain. Hey, you plead to abusing this kid, and you won't be in jail for that long. Whatever. I mean, that's the normal MO for a story. And by the way, if somebody is prominent and an allegation is made public and it's real, you will automatically get a bombardment of new allegations. People saying, "Oh, okay, now it's safe for me to come forward," and they immediately come forward and tell similar stories, and the dates line up, and that's the way that this all should work. And by the way, there is evidence of plying with alcohol or drugs or payoffs. And one of the problems in the Michael Jackson case is that because Michael Jackson is enormously famous and enormously rich, they can get over the payoff element. And yes, there was the lawsuit settlement, which was incredibly dumb and was one of the things that convinced me for many years that there must be something to this until I researched it more deeply. But because Jackson is so enormously rich, his perception of money and gifts and whatever is so far off of what a normal person's is that it looks like it could be a payoff. I mean, basically, even just staying at Neverland Ranch can be seen as a payoff. And so anyway, getting back to the timeline issue, in this case, none of that, as I just described, happens. None of it. Instead, it's incredibly slow. There's a custody battle that is involved at the beginning of this. There's all sorts of incentives that are perverse. There's evidence of the first. You always got to look at the first allegation. Allegation is, and that's why Square One. I love the title for Square One, because go back to the beginning.
To 1993.
What's that?
To 1993.
Right. Start at the beginning. The first allegation, especially in a child sex abuse case, will tell you everything. The first allegation should be the strongest. It should be rock solid, because here's somebody with no apparent incentive. I mean, because anybody that comes on afterwards, if there's blood in the water, especially with a rich person, there can be money that is motivating either the kid or the parents or both. And but in this case, the first allegation is just ridiculous. There's nothing backing it up. It was a massive mistake for Jackson to pay it off. And when you understand how it evolved, you realize, wait a minute, that's not at all how this should have happened. Even in 1993, even back then, before obviously the internet age and emails and computers and being as prevalent as they are today, but these cases do have evidence. That's what there's this perception that somehow, there's no evidence in a child sex abuse case, therefore we must believe everything that someone says. And I don't buy that, because there actually is evidence. And then, in the 1993 situation, that Michael Jackson went on trial not long after that, and that person never testified. So why did they not testify? They were perfectly allowed to testify. I mean, so to me, that blows apart the credibility of the whole story right there. And Square One does a very good job of explaining that whole reality.
Yeah. Yeah, and you said you always look at the timelines. That's the most important thing in this kind of cases. You also said that when you were referring to the Penn State scandal, also the timelines play a big role there. Can you tell something about that?
Well, yeah, for those who are unfamiliar, that's really the case that I first got very, very, very deeply far too deeply embroiled in. And in fact, you mentioned at the top of the podcast that you're not sure about what's going on with the World According to Zig podcast. We've actually put that on hiatus for much of this year because we've been working on a massive, probably unprecedented, I mean, seriously, unprecedented documentary podcast on the entire Penn State Joe Paterno, Jerry Sandusky scandal, which erupted in November of 2011, which caused the destruction of the lives of 5 people at Penn State, including Paterno and Sandusky, and over $100 million in settlements and all sorts of penalties against the university, the destruction of an incredible legacy of Joe Paterno and other people at Penn State. I have no connection to Penn State. I grew up in Pennsylvania, but I have no connection at all to Penn State. And I've been studying the case now for over 8 years. And hopefully that when and if this podcast actually comes out, and there's some pretty significant money behind it, people are going to have their minds blown. And as far as the timeline is concerned, Malcolm Gladwell, very famous best-selling author, he wrote a book last year called Talking to Strangers, which had a chapter about this case in it, where he uses my work essentially as his primary source, and he uses my work on the timeline, I think, to convince him that something is very, very wrong here. And it gets complicated, but I'll give you the very, very short version of this. The primary allegation involved a then graduate assistant named Mike McQuarrie, who allegedly saw Jerry Sandusky doing something with a boy in a shower. Now, people, first of all, need to understand that it was at least 10 years later that this becomes public. 10 years. Yeah. A lot happens in 10 years. People's memories change in 10 years. Circumstances change. I mean, 10 years is an incredibly long period of time. But here's the evolution of this. So when the story breaks in November 2011, Mike McQuarrie claims that this event occurred on March 1st, 2002. And then once they start to get emails from the administrators, voluntarily given up by administrators at Penn State, which is interesting because it doesn't sound like a cover-up, does it? We learned, guess what? He got the date wrong, he got the month wrong, and he got the year wrong. Now, when something happens like this is incredibly important for obvious reasons. And when I learned that he got it that wrong and that supposedly the real date was February 9th, 2001, my immediate reaction was, whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on a second. We're going to put everything on a witness who gets the date, the month, and the year, not just a little wrong, but way wrong. Yeah. So right away, we know he misperceived the situation. We know that right away.
Yeah.
Now my biggest mistake, Peter, is that I didn't follow my instincts fully on this. This is the biggest mistake. It's ironic that I actually have gotten some credit, in a mainstream source like Malcolm Gladwell's book on this, because I actually made a massive mistake here. Because when I interviewed Jerry Sandusky in prison, the first time, I've done it twice for many hours, I knew more than anything else I knew in the entire interview that he knew that second date, February 9th, 2001, could not be right. He knew it, but he couldn't figure out what the real date was. And I thought, wow, that's really something. Now, remember, I'm at this point thinking Jerry Sandusky is guilty. So I'm very skeptical of everything he's telling me. But I knew, everyone thinks they're a good judge of character. I can tell if someone's bullcrapping me or not. He knew. He knew that date could not be right. And I did a cursory investigation of that second date. And I was going to do the Today Show with Matt Lauer, and I for whatever reason, I just kind of dropped it. What I was finding didn't make any sense, and I didn't follow my instincts until a couple years later when it was reported by another person who's investigating this that there are problems with that February 9th date that I was unaware of. And for instance, what was going on campus that day is completely, 180 degrees different than what Mike McQueary claimed was happening on the night in question. So I thought, you know what, maybe I should look at this again. And I did a more in-depth investigation, one I should have done right off the bat. And I am now completely convinced, as is Jerry Sandusky, as are the people close to him, as is at least one of the, frankly, the primary administrator, a guy by the name of Gary Schultz, whose emails were the cause for the date change to begin with. We are all now completely convinced that this did not happen on February 9th, 2001, that it actually happened on December 29th, 2000. And the reason why that's significant is not just because Mike McQueary got it wrong twice, which would be significant in and of itself.
Yeah.
It now means that Mike McQueary waited 6 weeks to report this. 6 weeks from December 29th, 2000 to the morning of February 10th, 2001, when he goes to see Joe Paterno. That is not consistent with somebody who saw an act of child sex abuse. It blows it apart. It blows it completely apart because Mike McQueary did not see an act of child sex abuse. He saw a guy goofing around in a shower with a almost 14-year-old boy who he thought to be his son. That was mirror. What's that?
Right, through a mirror, right?
Yes, he saw it through a mirror, which is amazing. Yes, that's the other amazing part of this is that although his testimony on that somehow got more detailed over time, but yes, his original story was that he heard this and that he saw it for a couple of seconds in a mirror. And it's absurd. It's absurd that this got accepted. And let's be clear, when this story broke in November 2011, the entire news media accepted this story as if Moses had come down from the mountain with it on tablets from God, saying that this was true, this must be true, there's no other explanation. And the date alone blows this apart. And by the way, this is just the tiniest tip of the iceberg of this entire fiasco. And I've learned a lot about life and humans, none of it good from this case, but at least it has equipped me to be able to see other stories that are similar in ways that no one else can because I've lived it. And by the way, there are similarities to the virus story in the Penn State story. I've even had people who have followed my work on the Penn State story who have volunteered to me and said, John, this is just like Penn State, where once the media gets a narrative that they're invested in, that narrative must be right, especially if there's been a lot of damage that was done by the narrative, because no one wants to admit they were wrong and caused all this damage unnecessarily. And there are other similarities as well. But I do think in a strange way, I've kind of cracked the code of these kind of cases. And clearly that was part of why I was able to see through Leaving Neverland fairly quickly and other cases as well.
Yeah, because what a media narrative, can you tell me in short? What is a real media narrative in the way
media narrative is the general storyline that the media either creates or accepts to explain what has happened. And so in Penn State the narrative is Sandusky is a monster, Penn State covers it up because they're trying to protect football, and all these kids were harmed. And so once we accept that, then we see in the Penn State case, what happens immediately is we determine who the good guys and the bad guys are, right? That is so important. When once you decide, the media decides for you. I mean, my daughter, 8-year-old daughter, Grace, taught me this very early on because her first perception of any movie or TV show she's watching is who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, right? It's the first thing she's trying to determine. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? Just tell me who the good guys are and the bad guys are, and then I know who to root for, and then I know the prism through which to see the rest of the story. Well, in the Penn State case, all the people that the media put white hats on should have been wearing black hats. And all the people that the media put black hats on should have been wearing white hats, because those were the good guys. It's almost like the entire story is a black and white negative film image, where a negative film image is reversed of what the actual colors are. And almost to a T, all the good guys are the bad guys, and all the bad guys are the good guys. But once you determine, you just say, okay, these are the good guys in the story, people will see all the information through that prism. And especially when the subject is child sex abuse, which obviously, and for good reasons, makes everyone's heads explode. That plays a huge role in this.
Yeah, because nobody dares to reverse the narrative, and it's not popular to do that.
There's no incentive, and no one wants to be John Ziegler. I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, I deserve a lot of blame for why this situation can't be fixed, because I've been destroyed, and no one wants to follow that. I mean, there are some people that have followed it in a less, dramatic way. I mean, there are a lot of, Malcolm Gladwell and some other pretty prominent people, but no one wants to come out full bore, because look at what happened to John Ziegler. No one wants that, and I can understand that. But that's the world we're living in now.
You wouldn't recommend people to do that, to do the John Ziegler thing?
No, please do not. No. Do not. It's the dumbest thing I've ever done. I mean, it's literally the greatest work I've ever done. It might even be the greatest work I've ever heard of anyone doing in this field, but I would never recommend anybody do it, because it's not worth it. I mean, unfortunately, the truth just doesn't matter anymore. It just doesn't. The truth is irrelevant to what happens in reality. It really is. That's not an exaggeration.
And isn't there any hope? Is there a way to fight media narratives? In another way, maybe?
Boy, like I said, the only way to fight it is if like in the Michael Jackson case, you have a massive fan base that is energized. And the Michael Jackson fan base is just amazing. I mean, and the most amazing thing to me about the Michael Jackson fan base is that, yes, they're rabid, but the vast majority of them are not crazed. They're not. I've been amazed that there's no hatred, or hardly, any hatred. It's all fact-based. It's all based on trying to find out the truth. It's not based in emotion. I've been very impressed by every aspect, and surprised by because I presumed at the beginning, well, these are essentially cult members that don't want to believe that their hero Michael Jackson was a child molester. But this is incredibly substantively based. I mean, incredibly substantively based. And so the Michael Jackson fans should be very proud of what they've been able to do in defending Michael Jackson. Whether it'll be 100% successful, I have my doubts, but it's definitely it's prevented him from being completely canceled. And so that's the only way I know, is that you got to have a very rabid, large following in order to survive these things.
Well, these are great words for the Michael Jackson fans.
They deserve it. They've been incredible.
Yeah. About your upcoming podcast series. When can you tell us when it starts?
That's a great question. I wish I knew. I mean, we did this. We've been doing this during the shutdown, and under the hope and expectation that maybe sometime next year things will get some semblance to normal. The 10th anniversary of this story is next November, so I'm sure that the person who's paying the bills here wants it out as soon as possible. But I'm guessing here. My guess is sometime early next year is when it'll start. I mean, it's going to be long. I mean, the amount of content we have is just off the charts. So, but I don't have an exact date on that. But that's purely a guess.
Okay, well, that's great to hear. It's something to look forward to.
Yeah, it's definitely something people should look forward to because it's going to blow your minds.
So it's still in development, but because of COVID-19,
we're about 2/3 of the way through.
Okay.
Maybe more than that.
Okay, great. Nice. Well, thank you, John. Thanks for talking and thanks for your time. It was very interesting. I'm happy we were able to talk to each other via Skype in this way. I was actually supposed to visit you in California to see you in person. That didn't work out. I hope that we can try that again someday. It would be a pleasure.
I hope we can make that happen. And Thank you so much for your diligence and your good questions.
Thank you. Thank you for your compliments, John, and we'll keep in touch.
Keep in touch, Peter.
Will do. Take care of yourself.
Take care. Bye-bye.
And thank you for watching.